Today in our 2015 Ram 2500, we're going to take a look at and also show you how to install the Airlift Load Lifter 5000 air helper springs. These are designed for the rear axle. The part number is AL57289. Here's what our airbags look like installed. As you can see, they've completely replaced that factory jounce bumper. This is going to give us a lot more support back here on the rear end. And it's also going to soften it up so when we do have a heavy load on, that jounce bumper isn't constantly hitting the axle. Now the custom brackets on top and bottom are really easy to get installed. We don't have to worry about drilling the frame. We don't have to worry about making any modifications to the vehicle. These are custom designed for this application, so they're going to bolt right up for us. They're also going to offer a black powder coat finish, so they're going to be nice and durable. Now the dual inflation valves are going to be really nice for the in-bed style loads. Once they get offset one side to the other, whether it's from just an off-center load of stuff you've put in there or like a camper that might have a water tank on one side, we can adjust these individually to bring our truck back to level however we might need to. Now this is the typical situation when we see our customers requesting airbags. We've got a rear end sagging down, whether it's from a loaded up pickup truck bed, maybe a fifth wheel, a gooseneck, or even a ball mounted or a bumper pull style of trailer. Now we've got our truck loaded down with about 200 gallons of water. That's going to be just under the payload capacity for it. And we've got a lot of rear end sag. So when we get that sag, we're putting excess pressure on the rear suspension system here. It's going to cause premature wear and fatigue. As a side effect of that sagging as well, the distance that your suspension can travel is going to be much reduced. That's going to cause for a much bumpier and rougher ride. Now when the rear end goes down, we're taking weight off of the front end. When we reduce the weight that's pressing down on our front tires here, we're going to lose some steering capabilities, some braking capabilities, which ultimately leads to a worse handling situation or a truck that doesn't handle nearly as well. Also, when we lift up on the front end, the steering angle changes, the suspension geometry changes, and that causes excess wear on the outer edge of our tire, which you can see pretty plainly on this tire. The inside edge of the tires here still has some pretty decent grooves and some pretty decent tread. The outside edge here you can see is wore to where it's almost completely gone. As another side effect of that sagging rear end, your headlight angle is going to go up. That's going to decrease the effectiveness of your headlights. Now here you can really see what a difference air springs will make. We've got the exact same load in our truck that we had before, and we've eliminated all of the squatting here in the rear end and all of the rise in the front. This is going to help to alleviate those common problems that we get when we're hauling a heavy load. Now in addition to the load leveling capabilities, which are really helpful, the airbags, when our truck is unloaded and at the minimum pressure, from reading our customer reviews, they have added benefits for just the general overall ride quality of the truck. We're going to have reduced body roll side to side. It's going to soften up the abruptness of the suspension and really leads to just better ride quality. Also, something our customers have mentioned, and I think is a really good tip, is when we soften up the contact point back here when we're loaded up, that's going to transfer through to our trailer. So without air springs, when we've got that really rough ride, everything inside of whatever we're hauling is feeling that as well. When we put the air springs in and we get that additional suspension travel and we can soften that up, the things in our trailer are going to be kept safer. Now here's a look at our truck loaded down with and without air springs. You can really tell a difference as we start the slalom here. The body roll is going to be drastically reduced and the feel inside the car is much smoother. As we get into our big wide sweeping turns, you can see how the airbag is going to keep the truck level, reducing that body roll again. And behind the steering wheel, it really feels much more stable. And when you turn the wheel, it's more responsive. As we get into the bump section, you'll see with the increased suspension travel, it's really going to smooth out the ride as we head across any uneven surfaces, potholes, anything like that. Now before we begin our installation, we want to note the factory ride height of our truck. We always use the inside edge of the wheel well here. Just going to measure from the ground, and you want to write this down both here in the rear and in the front. Now the first step in our installation is going to be to get the jounce bumper removed. You're going to have a bolt here on the back side, Same place just up here on the front side. We're going to remove those with a 15mm socket. And that's going to provide us with the attachment points for our frame bracket. We've got that one there and that one there. Now let's head to the passenger side and repeat that same process. Now we can take the frame bracket, it's going to be the one with the largest hole. We'll position that up so that the large hole is facing out toward our tire. And we'll thread in the two longer of the button head bolts there. Then we'll get those torqued to the specifications and the instructions. Now we want to get both of our airbags set up just as you see this one. This is going to be our driver's side. For our passenger side, we want it to be a mirror image, so we'll start by threading in our swivel fitting there. You want to go hand tight with this and then a turn and a half further. 1.5. Now we'll bring the roll plate right down over the top, and you'll see how the holes in that plate are going to line up with the two holes remaining in the top of the airbag. Now remember, we want this to be reverse of the first one that we did. You'll see two square holes. One's going to be further away from this hole. The other one's a little bit closer. The one that's closer, we need to place one of our 3/8 carriage bolts in. Then we'll bring that down over and line it up with the holes there. And use the 3/8 button head screws to attach it. You see, we're putting this in because the roll plate will prevent us from putting that in later. These are the button head screws with the much finer threads, and they're going to be shorter than the ones we use for the jounce bumpers. Now we can snug our screws down, and we're going to torque these to the specifications in our instructions. Now we can turn our attention to our lower brackets. Now these, again, just like our uppers, are going to be pretty much carbon copies of one another. We have these large washers that we need to get put in place. These are going to be facing downward, so we're looking at the bottom of the bracket here. You'll see on the side closest to us, we've got a square hole and a square hole, also two round holes. We want our bolts, 3/8 bolt, to pass up through the bracket the same way those tabs are facing up. Then we place on the large washer, a nylon lock nut, and we're going to tighten both of these down so that they're secure. Do the same thing on both of them here. Now we can take our long carriage bolts, and these are going to come up through the square holes on each side, just like that. Each bracket's going to get two of them. Now we're going to grab our driver's side spring assembly. To identify that, you want the carriage bolt to be away from you and to the left. That's going to leave the open carriage bolt hole here. Now when we attach the lower bracket to the bottom of the spring, we want that large washer that we installed to be located underneath the square hole here, our carriage bolt hole location. So it'll be going together just like that. Don't forget your roll plate. And we'll set that on top, and just like we did before, we're going to put our screws in there to attach it. This time we're going to use the flathead bolts. Now we're ready to get our flatheads bolts torqued down to the appropriate specification, and we'll repeat the process for our other air spring assembly. Now we can get our assembly put in place here. The left side, this should be towards the outside of the vehicle and forward. As we do this, we need to bring this rear carriage bolt down in between the brake lines and the axle. You may have to compress your bag just slightly. For now, we need to get our upper mounting locations taken care of. And what we'll do is pass our swivel air fitting through that large hole, and the rear carriage bolt's going to go through that hole. Now on top of that, we want to place one of our 3/8 flat washers, and we're also going to thread on that nylon lock nut. Now on the opposite corner of our air spring, we're going to have the same square hole there. And we'll take one of our 3/8 carriage bolts and pass it up through. We're also going to put a washer and nylon lock nut on it. Now you can see that we've raised our axle up, bringing it closer to the bottom of the truck. That's reduced the distance between the old jounce stop and our upper bracket, and you can see it's got these to where they're sandwiched together. Now we just want to line up our brackets, then we need to tighten down our bolts. We'll do the same thing for our forward bolt. All right, now we're going to torque down each of our nuts. The one here in the rear, you're probably going to have to use what's called like a crow's foot. The one in the front, the short well socket, should be able to get in there for you. Now with this torqued down properly, let's go do the passenger side. All right, now the next step we need to complete is get our axle straps put around the bottom side. These just get placed up on our carriage bolts here. Then we're going to secure them just like we did before, a flat washer and a nylon lock nut. Now we can snug our nuts down here. Now we're going to torque these down to the specifications, which are also found in our instructions. Let's do the same thing on the passenger side. Now, something we like to do is just kind of trim these bolts off a little bit. It's going to prevent them from getting hung up or snagged on anything. Now, when we grab our airline, it's going to be one long piece. It's going to be a fitting on each end. We want to go to about the center section. We're going to cut it. Here we're using part number AL10530. Just a 1/4 inch tubing cutter. You can slide that down in and then just clip it to get these nice flush cuts. Now these can be installed just about anywhere on your vehicle your airlines will reach to. Some people like to put them on either side. In this case, because this plug's here, I'd probably put them side by side here if you chose to go in that location. I like to use the license plate bolt areas. We'll actually be able to bring these through, use them to attach the license plate to the vehicle, and we'll just have our 2 air filler nozzles right there, be nice and clean looking. So to do that, we're going to remove the plate. I'm going to drill these 2 holes out with a 5/16 inch bit. Then once we have those holes drilled out, you'll see these little tabs that stick off the back. We'll just want to trim those off. They don't have to be exactly flush, but pretty close to flush with the back side of the bumper there. If you don't have a high-speed cutoff tool, you could also use a razor knife. Now onto each airline, we'll thread on one of the nuts provided with the kit. And we're also going to place on serrated lock washers. Now, I like to leave these nuts just barely threaded on there. Once we have these pushed through the bumper, we can adjust for the length we want coming through. And we can just take those, place them through just like that. Now we'll take our plate, we can put it on there, and this is also going to work out if you have any kind of plate frames or anything you want to use. Then you'll place on one of the rubber washers there, one of the flat washers, and then another one of the nuts. This really just has to be hand tight. Just want to compress that washer a little bit. And we've got our cap to go over, and we've got a little bit of length there. You can adjust it in and out if you want. That's going to be a personal preference thing. Now we want to route each side towards the appropriate airbag. Be careful as you do this not to drag this tubing over any sharp metal. If you create grooves in it, it's almost definitely going to leak on you. And our airbag's on the outside of the frame rail there, so at some point you'll want to pass that over. And then I like to use zip ties to hold it in place anywhere I can. We do it around our hitch here, around this cross member, just to keep it up out of the way. Now you'll notice that underneath here we've got the spare tire removed, and we also took down the heat shield that's secured in 4 locations here. That's really just to make it easier for you to see. You can do most of this with that in place if you choose to, but definitely a little more open if you take them out. Now it's a good idea to keep a little bit of extra airline on each side in case you ever have to make any changes or any kind of adjustments. Just tuck it up there out of the way, and we'll have it if we need it. Now once we have our airline coming outside of the frame rail, we just need to push it into our elbow fitting. Again, you want to use a tubing cutter or a very sharp razor knife to get a good flush cut on the end. going to slide in, you'll feel an initial stop, and then you'll want to push it in just a little bit further. Do the same thing over on the passenger side as well. All right, now to test out our system, let's pressurize it. And we'll spray down our connections with some soapy water. Not only do we want to check the seam where air hose goes into the elbow, but also where the elbow goes into the bag. We'll just give that a few minutes to sit, make sure we don't see any new bubbles forming, and we'll be good to go. Now with no leaks detected, that's going to complete our installation of the Airlift Load Lifter 5000 air helper springs for the rear axle, part number AL57289, on our 2015 Ram 2500.
Click the link below to shop, learn more, or visit us at etrailer.com.